No doubt you have heard the Christmas story many times and the prophecies. But do you really know the Jewish roots and the cultural meanings behind the specific things that took place? We all read from both 1 Matthew and the first part of Luke into the Christmas story, but today we're going to blow open some of the exciting things of what each of those elements really mean.
And it just adds so much more depth and meaning to the Christmas story.
So tune in, you're not going to want to miss this episode.
Thank you so much for tuning in today on Live Life in the Spirit. I am Kristen Scharrenberg.
And I'm Pastor Penny Schulz. And today, as we said, we're going to look at those wonderful little tidbits in the Christmas story that maybe you had no idea of. So, Kristen, I did this, a couple of years ago, and I've brought it up multiple times throughout those meetings. And this was your idea to bring this to the listeners.
It was because it really, first of all, it's just fascinating. And second of all, it always adds so much more to the story when we get to dig into the Jewish roots and we really find out just how much attention to detail God pays and how much every little thing has significance and meaning. It's just amazing, and it just highlights what amazing, mighty God that we serve.
Oh, so well. I wanted to start with, if we look at Matthew, you have the genealogy. And there's something specific about that. Because how many generations are there from Abraham to David?
14.
And how many from David to the exile of Babylon?
14.
And how many from that exile to Jesus?
14.
That is not a coincidence.
Imagine that.
And well, there's a lot of names in that lineage in Matthew, and sometimes you get bogged down with that and you go, well, why does it even matter? Because it ends up with Joseph. Mm-hmm. Now, Joseph is not Jesus' biological father, but
he is his earthly father, and he provides that line and that lineage so that it helps fulfill one of the many prophecies about the coming Messiah.
And how can that be?
So how does that help fulfill that prophecy?
Well, because in Jewish tradition, there is a goel if the father is not present. There is a kinsman redeemer who can come in and fill that spot. So even though Joseph was marrying Mary, he still, by taking Jesus on as his stepson, became his goel, and then that entitled him to that entire inheritance of lineage that goes all the way back to King David. And that had to be because he had to come from the kingly line. Now, we know that from the scriptures because Isaiah tells us in Isaiah 7:14, he says, "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel," that is, God with us. So right here, they knew from the very beginning that the Messiah was going to come from a virgin, which means she would not have an earthly husband for that child.
Right.
It would come from God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's get back and think about that just a moment. We said that most of the girls at that time, where our little girls dream of finding Prince Charming or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. All the Jewish little girls dreamt of
being the mother of the Messiah, which for us, that just sounds foreign, but for millennia, that's what they've been dreaming of because they've been waiting for the Messiah.
So while it was in their culture, and even the boys knew that at some point a woman would give birth to a child that she had not had any relations with a man. So when it actually does happen, though,
I can't imagine. It's one of those things, especially for as long as they had been waiting.
Millennial.
I think that there was probably a part of them that went, wait, is this it? Really? No, this can't be it.
I know. So when it happened, there was that great joy. Oh my gosh, he chose me. But then at the same time, she's probably going, what am I going to tell my parents? What am I going to tell Joseph? Are they going to believe me? Mm-hmm. Are they going to, we waited for so long for the Messiah, and now that it's coming, they're not gonna.
Yeah, what if they don't believe me? Or, because the cultural implications of being pregnant out of
wedlock.
Well, she was in wedlock, but again, a different.
It wasn't
tradition.
Joseph's.
Right, they had not come together yet.
So we see that we knew that the Messiah that had been prophesied all along, that he would come from the kingly line of David, hence why Joseph. But then he also had to come from the priestly line, which comes through Mary, and that's why with John the Baptist, besides him coming to prepare the way, that's another crucial part of that story, is because not just Zechariah, but Zechariah and Elizabeth come from the priestly line, but Elizabeth. So Mary comes from Elizabeth, and Elizabeth comes from which direct line?
From Aaron, the brother of Moses.
So the direct priestly line.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus is from the kingly side and the priestly side. So here you go. Okay. Now there's something else that's really exciting, because it is a little town that they find themselves having to go to. And why is that?
Because it's time for a census, and because Caesar had ordered a census to be taken, and everyone had to return to where they were from, like their originating town, in order to be counted.
So since David was from Judah, then Joseph had to go to Bethlehem, where David was from.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a really cool thing, because Bethlehem, a lot of people don't realize it. Micah 2 says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times." Now this is really neat, because there is a mystery behind the name Bethlehem. Actually, there's several mysteries. For one, it is the only town that has not one but two names. And it's called what?
Bethlehem, Ephrathah.
Okay, so we're going to look at Bethlehem. In Hebrew, if you break Bethlehem down, it's Beit Lachem. The first part of the word, Beit, means
House.
right. The second part, Lachem, means
Bread.
so you have house of bread.
And Jesus is the
Bread of life. Okay, then the second word, the second name for that is Ephrathah. Ephrathah means
Puree of the vine.
how cool is that? So Jesus is literally born in the only town that is called the House of Bread, the puree of the vine, and you have Jesus being the bread of life and
His blood is shed.
You had communion right there in the town that he is born in. How awesome is that?
God is the God of details.
Yes. So Bethlehem is only 4 miles from Jerusalem. And there's a reason for why the shepherds were out watching their fields by night. Because actually Jerusalem, they did not want stinky, smelly shepherds. They did not want livestock. They didn't want sheep. They didn't want anything around Jerusalem. But there was a problem, because what did they need at the temple?
They needed livestock for sacrifice.
Exactly. So they had to compromise. So they're like, okay, well, Bethlehem, you're 4 miles away. We'll let you be the one. And it was on the hillside, so there was grass. So they were going to allow only the lambs for the temple sacrifice to be born and raised there. So it was still close enough to take, but it was out of the jurisdiction.
Far enough away to keep the smell at bay.
Okay, so we're talking about temple sacrificial
sacrifice.
lambs.
Right.
So when Jesus is then born, what is it that, well, it's not just the shepherds that find out first, but what is it that they do with baby Jesus?
It says that they wrap him in swaddling cloths.
Okay, now there's something with the swaddling.
It is.
The swaddling is actually, the term is used for binding broken limbs. Now that actually comes to Isaiah 61. He says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives, and to release from the darkness the prisoners, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor on the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. That is so neat. Mm-hmm. So really you I see the link right there with the strips. But there's something even more cool about those swaddling cloths. They're not just any cloth.
No. And this was one of the other reasons why the shepherds would have understood the depth of this. So the priests wore priestly robes, and the garments themselves were considered sacred or holy. And so when they needed to be retired, if they were getting worn looking, they didn't just toss them away. So they would take those priestly robes and they would tear them into strips of cloth. So every lamb, when it was born, had the potential to be a sacrificial lamb. And in order to be that, though, it had to remain unblemished. So they would wrap them in these clothes, because as you mentioned, they're in the hills up in Bethlehem, and it's pretty rocky and
they're clear. Those hills are like this. They're not just rolling hills like we think. It is steep. It's rock. It's jagged. It's not.
So they had to keep them protected, and so they would wrap them in these swaddling cloths that were from the priestly robes. So if you can imagine, the sacrificial lambs, the unblemished lambs, were wrapped in these, and Jesus, even at birth, it is a foreshadowing of what is to come, because he is the ultimate sacrifice. And I can't imagine. I know they wouldn't have probably known the weight of that, and yet they would have known what they were used for. I would imagine on some level, I would have had to hit heavy.
Yeah, but because even the shepherds knew the prophecy. Mm-hmm. Even the shepherds were waiting for the coming Messiah. And so when he said, "This will be a sign to you, you will find a babe wrapped in the swaddling cloths." But like I said, in Hebrew it's written just a little different. Because how would that distinguish from any other baby? It's because they saw the priestly robes.
Right. They knew what those meant.
Isaiah 11:1 says, "A shoot shall come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit." Now in Hebrew, branch means netzer. And that's where we get the word Nazarene. Nazarene. That's why Jesus was a Nazarene. He was the branch. See, every little prophecy has been fulfilled in and through Jesus. Even those little ones that we are not even aware of. Right. So given all the prophecies and given all the things that they knew, so Jesus is a culmination of all of these prophecies. And that I love, because I think about Mary. I think about her parents. Think about Joseph during this time. Dig in a little deeper. Put yourself in their sandals. When this happens to Mary, like I said, the dream that every little girl, Jewish girl's dream has come true for her. She's the one picked. And if you're a Presbyterian, Calvin gets a lot of rap because of predestination. But to be honest, when you think about it, there are a lot of people throughout biblical history that were predestined. John the Baptist was predestined to do what he was called to do.
He was chosen and called to do that. Now, he always had the choice, but I would think that he was molded into that by, again, the choices of his parents and their obedience to God. And through
Zachariah and Elizabeth was chosen. And so then you end up with Mary, who is a cousin. None of these are coincidences. Put your mind around the fact that God created Mary just to be she's more than that, but he created her to be the mother of the Messiah. And likewise, he created Joseph to be the earthly father of Yeshua. Of course, now Joseph had free will, and he had two choices. So to give you a little background about a Jewish wedding, when it says that Mary was betrothed to Joseph, well, it means she was engaged. But what would happen is the groom would come, and a lot of times they had handpicked the woman that they wanted to marry. Sometimes it was arranged, but not always.
Right.
And I am sure that Mary knew Joseph, and Joseph had been watching Mary because he had been watching her grow, and he was so taken by her her humility and her kind-hearted spirit and heart, just everything. So he comes to Mary's parents and asks for her hand in marriage. Now, what you may not know is a woman at that point actually had the right to say no. Didn't happen very often. And a father could overrule that. But she does have a choice. But she knows Joseph, and she has seen Joseph's heart and spirit as well. And so they gladly say yes. And at that point, and through most Jewish ceremonies, there is the giving of bread and the drinking of wine from the same cup.
So a ceremony to sort of symbolize this covenant that's been formed between the two of them. And then it was a binding document and a binding marriage. It wasn't like today's engagement where you get a ring and then if you decide 6 months in that this is just not working out, you can give the ring back or walk away and it's not a big deal. If something had changed at that point in time, what would they have had to do?
Well, once they're already bound, then the only thing to do would be to issue a divorce, which then made it almost impossible for the girl to get another suitor. I mean, all of a sudden they had a big X on them and kind of a stay away.
Right. But so they've been betrothed, they've had this ceremony, but then what happens?
Well, then the husband goes to prepare a place for his wife, just like John 14:1 says. Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you, and I will come back to get you so you may be where I am. So the husband goes there, and the wife, which would be Mary, she stayed home with her folks for however long it'd be, 6 months to a year, and she learned how to be a wife. And then the husband would come back at the point in time. Well, during this, after, we don't know how many months really go by, but Mary is visited by Gabriel.
So yeah, she was visited by Gabriel, and I just love every single time he shows up, the very first thing that he has to say is, do not be afraid. It's just a side note. This is not a cute little cherub angel that we picture, or even like the beautiful flowing Goldilocks, this is like a mighty warrior angel.
Messenger angel.
Angel, yeah.
Very scary.
not a presence that you would want to be woken by, or, it would have been a commanding presence for sure. Do not be afraid. But then he tells her that she is going to be with child, and that she is going to be the mother of the Messiah. And he tells her, because you can imagine, even though, like we've talked about, they've been waiting for this Messiah, I'm sure later on she would have been going, did I dream that? Is that really true? Am I just losing my ever-loving mind? And so he gives her this message that the sign that this is true is that her cousin Elizabeth, who is well on in years, is going to have a child. And so after she's visited by Gabriel, she leaves to go and visit Elizabeth. And then what happens?
And then the cool part is when Mary, just even the sound of her voice, John the Baptist, the baby inside of Elizabeth, just leapt for joy at the mere sound. And so she finds out that, okay, this is true, this is real,
all of this is happening.
And Elizabeth knows all this too, by divine revelation. But when Mary goes back, there's a problem, because now Joseph sees her, and she is not the way she was when she left.
No, she would have been quite pregnant by then.
So we do know a little bit more about Joseph than a lot of people think. We know he's from the lineage of David. We know he's of an upstanding character. We know he is a man of integrity and kindness and a good heart. And when he sees her pregnant, he does have a choice. He can what?
So he can be the first one to throw the first stone and have her stoned to death, or he can divorce her.
But this is what's cool about the scriptures. It says he thought about it, and he chose in his heart to divorce her quietly.
He wasn't going to make a public spectacle out of it or anything, but to try to give her as much dignity as possible.
And then I love how God does not keep us on the hook. It was already that night. He went home, and the same angel, Gabriel, shows up to Joseph. And what does he tell him?
He's like, don't be afraid to take her as your wife. The child growing inside of her is the Son of God, this Messiah that they have been waiting for. And so he doesn't leave Joseph wondering or worrying or fretting. He puts his mind at ease. So then he can go and put Mary's mind at ease. And
so if you could just imagine that now, I mean, think about the rush of emotions and everything. You go from Mary, from the high and the joy of finding out she's going to be the mother of the Messiah, to, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And is this even real? To going and seeing Elizabeth and solidifying that, but then knowing she has to go back.
Well, yes, because that whole time Elizabeth and Zachariah knew, so they got to be, I mean, poor Zachariah couldn't talk, but they got to be in excitement. When you have someone that you can share a secret with or share that with, then to have to leave that and go back to where no one else knew, that would have been really hard to do.
Think about Mary's folks. For you parents out there, I mean, good grief, if it was your child that was chosen, would you, even though you knew the prophecies, even though you've been praying for this all along, when it actually happened, would you believe them?
Right. You'd like to think so, but it would be hard.
And then knowing that you're still living in a society that would not
necessarily
fully
accept that, right?
And you think of the roller coaster of emotions for Mary, the up and down, and what will Joseph say, and what will he do? And while she knew in the back of her mind that stoning could always be a possibility,
I would think with that gift would have to come that sense of peace, of knowing that God was going to work it out. And even though her humanity would have been freaking out at times, she would have had that knowledge of, okay, well, God's not going to bring me to this point and not get me through the rest of it.
Right, because if she had been stoned or something like that, then the Messiah would have not been born. And so, you have that promise.
Mm-hmm. But she was still human.
Yes. And can you imagine Joseph, all the emotions going through his head? I picked her, I chose her because of her
the very qualities.
All this stuff. And now what? That didn't go as planned. I didn't see that coming. There's all those things. Have you ever had a time where maybe you felt like the rug was ripped out from underneath you, where you felt yourself going, I didn't see that coming, or that was not in the playbook.
This was not in the brochure.
Well, that's where our two parents of the Savior find themselves, but because of the angel that came to Joseph, they were able to together say, we can do this with God. Not even having a clue what they were getting into.
Yeah, that would be one of those times when you would sign up for something or agree with something and really not know the fullness of what that looked like.
I think there's a lot of us that can relate to that. I mean, when you think about your kids, you birth your own kids, and you don't know. Sometimes they turn out good. Sometimes there's physical or mental disabilities. Sometimes there's just struggle with children and their personalities, or you have estranged children later on. You just don't know how it's going to turn out. And then you sit back and you go, well, that's not what I thought
it was going to be. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we sign up for things really quickly on the dotted line before, sometimes we sign up for things on the dotted line not even thinking about that anything could go wrong, and then it does.
Right.
But through all of that, God shows us that His grace and mercy is there from the very start. And it's just neat how all those little things with the Christmas story add up through the prophecies, and when you know that culture, and why was that all everything had to do with kind of the marriage ceremony, and we kind of looked at that. You'll have to go back and look at one of our episodes last year on the Goel. I think it's with chapter 4. It's after throne room or 5 with the scroll. Mm-hmm. Because Jesus is the bridegroom who's coming back for his bride. And so everything that has been done throughout scriptures and even through Revelation is that bridegroom and that bride, that cultural tradition of how they do a marriage ceremony. betrothal, all that stuff. Jesus fulfills all of that. And just like any good groom, he has gone on to prepare a place for his bride. And when the Father gives the okay, he's coming back for his bride. And I just love the fact that a Jewish wedding is how many days?
7.
And I am definitely of the pre-rapture belief now, after I've done a lot of studying and a lot of reading of the scriptures. It is, I don't know how you can believe it any other way, but if the rapture happens before the tribulation, how many years are there in the tribulation?
7.
And where would the church be?
We will be up celebrating that wedding feast and preparing to come back.
That's right. So we hope maybe this gave you just a little extra joy and a little extra knowledge, the fun stuff that makes that Christmas story mean so much more.
So much richer. Yeah. So in case your Christmas plans have left you going, I did not see that coming, just realize something amazing can still come from that. We send you peace and joy and hope for a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year.
So until next time,
Shalom.